All right, we're on air. It is Thursday, September 21st. Thank you everybody for joining our meeting today. This is a meeting to check in on development tasks for Backdrop CMS. Quickly, before we get into dev tasks, we should all now have the final copy of the Software Conservancy Fiscal Sponsorship Agreement. I sent our copies off last week. Hopefully everybody else has sent theirs too. The rules on that, or you have to actually print the document out and sign it and then scan it, which is hard because it involves both a printer and a scanner, which us online folk don't generally like to use. But hopefully we'll get that document signed and returned to our fiscal sponsor, and then we'll be able to be under their umbrella. And we're hoping that we'll be able to announce that at our next newsletter. So not the one that's going out about 1.8, but the one after that. So a month from now, we should have that all taken care of. But that does mean they need to get all of our copies of that document soon-ish. Contributed projects this week. Chosen Drupal module was ported over. If anybody liked Chosen instead of a multiple select thing, that's available. I did that this week and I would love some feedback. So if anyone wants to use it.
Yeah, I think we have an issue as well of getting it into core or something. I think.
Yeah, I think for core we're looking at using Select 2, and there is a contrib module for Select 2. It's a little bit more robust. It doesn't just handle multiple select elements, but it could also replace our autocomplete. Core's autocomplete has got some kind of old crufty code running it. So the Select 2 into core will be a little bit more in depth of a change than Chosen, which is just multiple select. But yeah, both are good, solid Drupal solutions to that problem. So I'm happy to have them in Backdrop. Let's talk about Backdrop since we just had a release, Backdrop Core. We released Backdrop version 1.7.3, which was a bug fix release, along with the new feature release 1.8.0 last Friday. I think they went out around 10:30 p.m. If you're looking at GitHub's timestamps, those are translated based on where you are, we think. So depending on where you are in the world, it might look like it came out on the 16th, but it did come out on the 15th in Californian time. And in 1.7.3, we included all of the bug fixes and minor usability improvements that we thought weren't going to introduce any new testing requirements, and anything that was a little bit more comprehensive or required more tests or markup changes went into 1.8.0 instead. So we were able to get a bunch of aesthetic improvements into 1.8. So if you updated 1.8 and you go and check out like the admin config page, there's new icons there. That page is responsive. It had kind of a general aesthetic boost. There's also some changes to the progress bar, which look great. There's some changes to the task list. So I think like it feels updated, which is great. But a couple of our favorite issues didn't make it in time for 1.8. In particular, all of the stuff that we were working on for managing files. And so one of the issues that we wanted to talk about in today's meeting was trying to figure out a specific focus for our next release. And I thought it would be good if we could kind of clean up all of this file management stuff that we were working on for 1.8 and try and put it all together and get it into 1.9. And if 1.9 could be like a file handling media focused release, that might be a big win for Backdrop. So we have 3 issues in particular. One of them is the ability to edit an existing file. There's some confusion about what you expect to happen when you edit a file and what actually happens when you edit a file using like file entities edit, having a pretty big disconnect. And so we need to figure out how to clean up that user experience so that when somebody edits a file, it does what they expect, not what Drupal and Backdrop think it should do. So there's just kind of some experience cleanup we've got to fix there. The ability to upload a file outside of file field is something that we're pretty close on, but I think that that task should go hand in hand with the ability to have different file types and fieldable file bundles, which are issues 2633 and 2632. And both of those have pull requests that are close, but not close enough to be committed as they are. So I think we should look at the two together and see if we can figure out how to move that forward. In particular, there's kind of an interesting multi-step form that came from file entity module that I think we'll want to replace with an AJAX system, so that when you upload a file, it can determine what type it is and then ask you the correct follow-up questions based on what type of fields you have attached to those file types, rather than having to go through a multi-step form workflow. And if we can do that, we'll also have that built into the file upload tool in both places. So I think both of those are really solid first attempts, but we've got some more work to get them in. I would love to see them in by 1.9, but we're going to need some more human testing as well as some more refactoring before that'll be ready. So that's kind of where we are with 1.8. A possible plan for 1.9. Another thing that we should talk about too is translation and internationalization. Right now in Backdrop, we're sort of in the same place as we were with Drupal, with the exception that we don't actually have translations yet. And we're working on a translation server, but that's also not quite ready. So I don't know if it would be good to talk about what our plan is for translation in Backdrop 1, if there's more we can do before Backdrop 2, or if there's stuff that we need to be changing about the way Backdrop handles translation. We should talk about the plan for 1.2, or if we should focus on, I don't know, files for 1.9. Maybe we can do translation for 1.10 or whatever comes after 1.9, whether it's 2 or not. Does anyone have any thoughts on either of those plans for our future?
Just wanted to say that it is a huge undertaking, because it's a very complex problem, and we are short on hands, so it shouldn't disappoint us if it takes us long. I mean, everybody's trying to help as much as they can. There are some low-hanging fruits that we can. I just don't have the time. There's small issues like adding a language button in the WYSIWYG CK editor, which is like the respective path has been already implemented in either DH or the Sept in Shrimp module. It just adds a language tag on the paragraphs or the text in the WYSIWYG editor, and this it's sort of like just a tiny baby step, you know.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Do we have an issue for that for Backdrop?
Sorry?
Do we have an issue for that for Backdrop?
I was about to file it. I'm still looking at the thing. We'll get to that over the weekend.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of little things we can do in 1.x, whether it's a contrib module or making little modifications like that to core. But I would love to figure out, like, for people who are translating their sites, like what the biggest pain points are, just so we can kind of get them on a list of like, these are things we need to consider fixing. And I think we can make a lot of improvement a little bit at a time. But if there is something that's like fundamentally weird that needs refactoring, we should think about what that'll mean for Backdrop 2 as well. Because if we are coming up on deciding when to create a Backdrop 2, and we're trying to figure out what API breaks are necessary, if that is something that's important, that should be on our list of something to consider for Backdrop 2. So I don't know, for people who are doing sites in other languages, if there is anything that's a showstopper right now that would prevent you from doing a site on Backdrop. That's the thing that we should look at first. And that might just be translation server. If we get translation server done, maybe everything else is not so important.
Well, not exactly specific things, but there's always been a discussion about whether CMSs and Drupal or Backdrop in specific should be multilingual from the ground up, as in instead of having to enable modules, it should be like even the default English language should be like translation should be enabled by default, and English should be a translation that is the default. It's just adding languages on top of that. It's just this the argument, the opposite argument on top of that is it adds complexity, and maybe there's speed or performance hits there if you have it on by default, which I respect, but I'm not sure how, if that's measurable, like if we have solid numbers of content, how much slow backdrop or Drupal becomes if translation is enabled by default. But I know that Drupal 8 claims that they're multilingual from out of the box, but I'm not sure how they're doing it.
Yeah, I also wonder, like, if we have a good enough separation between content translation and interface translation, because I think like it's probably more sites have a need for the whole thing to be in not English than they have a need for the whole thing to be in multiple languages. And it would be great to see if we could figure out, like, if the whole thing being in not English is easy to just like install in whatever language, like that option we have. If we can get that working, that might cover the majority of our use cases. But I don't know what the needs are number-wise for having something be more than one language out of the box. It would be good to know, especially if our audience are people who are more likely to need that. We can check, I guess, our user statistics for translation modules. I don't know. We need to know specifically the ones in core, I guess, who's got them on. But yeah, we can also measure the performance, and if there's a specific problem, we can troubleshoot and diagnose what that problem is too. So I think knowing whether we need it would help us figure out if we should turn it on, and if we should turn it on, there's a performance problem, we can fix that. I make that sound easy. We can look into fixing that.
If we go down the path of having to enable multilingual, be it translation of the interface or text, I think that's a 1.x issue. If we try to do it multilingual out of the box, it might be a 2.x.
Yeah.
So certainly it's going to be some API breakages there or changes.
Okay. Does anyone have any thoughts about having 1.9 be focused on file handling and media handling in Backdrop? Do you think it would be good to kind of focus our efforts on these 3 issues that we started this release and try and get them?
Yeah, I think it's a good one.
Okay. Maybe we should also take a look at that media meta and see if there's anything else in there that would or should be a priority. I mean, these ones are big ones, but I think there's a lot of little ones in that issue too.
And perhaps also, I'm not sure either that we have a ticket for that. The idea of getting the promoted instead of the experimental modules, so that we can get more traction on the references.
So I checked out reference this weekend. It's actually not ready to be used yet. As it says on its README page, it's like, don't use this. So I think we should, and I have a good project to play with it on too. I have a Drupal 7 project that needs to get updated to Backdrop that has both entity reference and references module on it. So I thought it would be a perfect candidate for an upgrade path from both of those. And because I'm using the 2 different modules and those both have sort of different feature sets, we could try and see what features are necessary, like the ability to choose a list of entities from a view, right? Stuff like that that's missing from reference module. But I did add a flag to the view on backdropcms.org since last time you asked, so that we can sort modules by whether they're promoted or not. We don't have anything in core that specifically looks for that and colors it, but I think that we could definitely add that. But I think that maybe we should make sure references is ready to promote to people before we start telling people to use something that says it shouldn't be used. So I don't know if you have other ideas about other projects, Clonus, that you want featured.
Well, on that, what you said, maybe promoted is not the best word or like a concept, because promoted would mean it's ready, just please try it out. It's more like we need help to flesh out any problems. We need to convey that it's experimental, and it's like something that is, I don't know, core candidate or something like that.
Yeah, I just think that if what we're asking, like if the tool that we're giving people to install the module is something that would install it through the user interface, it needs to be in a state where people can, like, it needs to be stable enough that the people who are going to use it aren't going to have serious issues with it. That might be true of reference. I don't know. I haven't tried to install it with installer and see what we get. But maybe we just need to update the README file so it's not so scary. Because I don't want it to be like, here, try this thing. And then you look at the thing and it's like, do not use this. You're like, wait, what? It could just be that the README file's out of date. But yeah, I agree. I don't know where we are with that in terms of next steps. Like, I feel like the website, in terms of our site building stuff, is ready. Someone will need to look at the way Backdrop ingests that data on the project installer page and see. I mean, I think it just pulls straight from the feed. I don't know, but there's something about, like, when you type a search query in, it's gonna match based on your query and not. I don't know if it's gonna sort the results that match. So there might be a little extra tweaking we have to do in there to get it to actually tell people, like, if you type in reference, it's still going to show you references module before reference module.
I remember that there was a problem with the search function in project browser. Like, it wouldn't be. It's an old, long-standing issue.
Okay.
It wouldn't return the expected results. Can't find it now, but. And also there was a ticket, I remember that one vaguely, an idea again that perhaps the available projects should be cast locally. Yeah, because, that was back Drupal South last year, when I didn't have internet connection and I wanted to display that, but look, without an internet connection, it wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't make sense searching for modules, because even if you could get the list of modules via the local cast,
you couldn't get the module.
You wouldn't be able to install it. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if there's a problem with the search, it sounds like we have opportunity to fix the problem with the search and add the sort for projects that are featured or promoted or whatever. And I think you're right, we can change that language, but because we already have that promoted flag in core, that's what we should use. We should just make sure that what's conveyed to the user is more honest about what the state of that project is. That's totally fine. But yeah, I don't know. Do we have an issue on backdropcms.org for this? Maybe we should move it into our 1.9 focus list.
You mean the search not working properly, or
just the bigger issue of how to promote our experimental modules?
No, we don't have a thing.
Okay, I'll try and create one of those today, and I want to put it into the 1.9 milestone so that we can think about if we have to make any changes to core. We've got enough time to properly think about how to organize that and get it in for the next release. Anything else we should talk about today?
Well, there was that issue about that Doc Wilmot brought up. My mind went blank now. With regards of like the disabled modules and the RID, role IDs and VIDs. Thanks for filing a separate issue about that. I still think that there's value in backing up things that we have removed, just in case. But yeah.
So I'm not sure everybody is aware of this issue, but it was a good one. Replimut was porting a module to Backdrop and realized that some of the data that he needed in order to do the port was no longer in Backdrop when he ran the port, because he was accidentally running the update for contrib after core, not realizing that core has a mechanism built into it so that if you run all of your updates and core is going to delete a bunch of data, it can run a contrib update between two of the core updates, like the one where it changes the data and the one where it deletes the data. And then we realized that the bigger problem was that Drupal, since the beginning of time, has had a page of documentation that tells people that you can update contrib after core. And only in Drupal 7 was this core mechanism built in that allowed modules to run their updates between core updates. And the documentation page on Drupal.org had never told people that now it's not safe to run your contrib updates after core updates, because the data that your contrib modules might need might not be there anymore. And so there's this built-in process for human beings to want to update core separately from contrib. And so we need to figure out a way to allow people to upgrade safely from Drupal to Backdrop, even if they have been trained to do things incorrectly by Drupal. So there are a couple of possible solutions, and I think we came up with 3 actionable items that we can do. One of them is when Backdrop gets to a place where its update needs to be run in a particular order and it can't do it, it should tell people that it can't do its update, because right now it just completes like nothing is wrong. And it doesn't even throw any kind of error. It just accidentally doesn't work anymore when you're done doing the update. So that's one thing that's pretty easy for us to do. We can detect when that happens and we can set a message. Another thing we can do is, oh man, I don't remember the second one. Oh, we can, when you go to start your update, it can tell you if there's files that are missing. So for example, if you're upgrading from Drupal to Backdrop and you're on the update page and there's no contrib modules there, Backdrop could set a message at the top of the page that's like, hey, some of your files seem to be missing. And it doesn't have to be a blocking message that would like prevent people from updating. So if you want to update, you still can. But at least it would let you know, like, hey, your contrib projects are missing. Before you hit this button, which might break everything, you might want to put your modules here so that you don't break everything. So we can warn people ahead of time. And then if they do it in the wrong order and they get to a place where there's a problem, we can let them know that there's a problem. So there's 2 steps of notification we can do. One before they get into a problem, and the other one after they get into the problem. And then notice after they get into the problem, we'll say, sorry, you have to run your update again. So we definitely want the one before so that we don't get to the one we have to after. But then there's the third thing that we could do, which was take all of this data that we're deleting from Backdrop that's not compatible with how Backdrop works and shove it into a storage state. So for example, we could use the state system, which isn't great. We could use a database table, which is probably the best place to put it, where we could have some kind of mapping from what Drupal's role ID used to be to Backdrop's role name, or Drupal's taxonomy vocabulary ID to Backdrop's vocabulary name. Like any of this stuff that is not compatible with how Backdrop works, but we had in Drupal and a contrib module might need, could be stashed into one of these locations so that if a contrib module needs that data while it's running its update, it's there. The database is available while it's running its update and it can grab it. The one thing we should absolutely not do is put that value into a configuration file that contains data that Backdrop does use and that contrib developers can use, because they might get that wrong if the data's in there. They might think that they could use a role ID from Drupal in Backdrop where they can't, because it won't exist if the site hasn't been upgraded from Drupal. It won't exist if the site has been upgraded from Drupal and a new role has been added, or if role name has remained the same but an ID is different. Like there's a lot of places that just doesn't work with configuration management. And so I think putting the data that's not safe in a place where people trust data is generally not a good idea. And if we have some files that have data and sometimes files that don't, that also creates kind of an inconsistency for people when they're reading configuration to know whether that value is going to be available or not. Where all of our other config files, they have all the values there all the time. Our config system isn't really engineered in a way where sometimes it should have a value and sometimes it shouldn't. It's just, I think, a little sloppy to leave things around that way. But we can keep the data. And that way, somebody who needed to write a module that had an update hook that depended on a role ID could have this backup source, so that if you wanted to require that your module run between 2 core updates, you can. But if you didn't want to, you wanted to be able to update this module after core updated, you could query the legacy table for the mappings of the role IDs that you need when you're making it. And that way, we are giving Contrib a way to allow people to upgrade their sites incorrectly, which is not great. But if you've already started upgrading your site, it does prevent you from needing to throw it out and start all over again, which is good. So I think as long as we notify people that that's not the right way to do things ahead of time, so they have some warning. So when you run update.php, if people still choose to do it that way, that's fine. And if we can make it so that they can do it that way without hurting themselves, that's even better. So these 3 issues, I don't know what their numbers are, but they should be recent ones in the backdrop core queue. Could use some feedback. We definitely could use some help with the language around, like, how do you warn people in a way that is both not terrifying and useful in both instances, that, hey, you need to update is kind of bad news to deliver. How do we say that friendly? And maybe you want to put your Contrib modules in here before you run the update. And then also, if you have a Contrib module that needs this data that has been deleted from Backdrop, in particular, anything having to do with taxonomy or anything having to do with users, because we know those are 2 places where we're missing keys, let us know what you want that database table to look like. Like, we might need one that's like legacy user roles and one that's legacy taxonomy term. Another place where this has come up a couple of times is with views, because views used to be stored in the database and now they're in config files. There could be any number of other places in the switch to config where we had to change from auto increment IDs to names. Any one of those is going to need one of these also. So anyone who's working in Contrib runs into this problem, we can create these legacy data store tables. We just need to know what format they should be in for each given one, in terms of convenience for those Contrib projects. So please weigh in on those issues.
I think that keeping them in the database is a good compromise. If we keep the data there, I'm not sure what value warning the user has, because
it's because we don't know everything. Like, we can't possibly know everything every Contrib module ever needs to change between 2 core updates. We know for sure the data that we've deleted, right? Like the role IDs and the vocabulary IDs. But there could be anything that any Contrib module is like, oh, by the way, before you do whatever, I want to do something else. And that doesn't necessarily have to do with these IDs. Like, it could be anything in core. And because that hook has been around since the beginning of Drupal 7, there could be any Contrib module that's coming from Drupal 7 that needs to do weird things to its data, that's already doing stuff that we don't know about. So I think we can't just say it's safe to do it the wrong way, because we can't anticipate what people might be doing in there. So we just need to find a way that the message can say, most of the time it's fine, but this is the wrong way to do it. So
I was thinking that there's functions that used to use role IDs, for example, and I'm not sure what we're doing now if we detect that it's just a number, because that's what our IDs used to be in D7. Then we throw a message about deprecated or whatever.
Yeah, unfortunately, the way the role IDs worked is that if it was a number in Drupal 7, it's also a number in Backdrop. It's just a string number instead of an integer number, and it's not an auto increment anymore. So in PHP, that's kind of hard to test for, because it is messy. If we had actually changed the name to like role dash RID or whatever, then that we maybe could have done that. But and someone could also create a role whose name is like 12. We wouldn't be able to know. Hopefully they aren't, but you never know. But yeah, there's definitely, and I would say it's also up to every contrib module to decide how much testing to do. Like Doc Wilmot had recommended 3 potential upgrades where he was willing to put in 3 use cases in his module where he's like, first check to see if I need to do the update, and then check to see if the update's been done. And then if the update hasn't been done, then I'm going to build in this like extra use case of like, this is the situation where somebody put their contrib modules in after they updated core, and I'll have an extra upgrade for that. And I would say, depending on whoever's writing the contrib module, like you could write your own tests in there for trying to determine what part of the upgrade you're in and what data you have available and what data you don't. The only part that's necessary for core is checking to see if like the schema is the way you want it before you change it, which is what we already do with like the hook update last removed, which would check to see if Drupal updates had been run, if we're doing other things after that, just preventing errors. But there's a lot more we can do that would help the user, right? Where it's like, oh, if you did things the wrong way, we can test for that. And depending on what the module is, what you're testing for will probably be different too. None of the ones that I did were around role IDs. They were all around vocabulary IDs. But there was a lot of that where it's like, Drupal also introduced a vocabulary name halfway through the 7.x cycle. So there's kind of a lot of testing you have to do around vocabulary IDs too, just from that. So yeah, if you want to help people more, that's good. Anything else we should talk about? I know all we've been talking about for a really long time is 1.8, and now 1.8 is out. Woohoo! But I've been having a lot of fun upgrading my sites. So I've got some issues in the queue related to doing updates. Not backup 1.8 issues, just general issues.
We did have some breakages with the UI, correct? Have they been fixed? I mean, if I remember the drop-down button, something like that.
Oh, they should have gotten fixed in 1.8. Are they more broken?
Oh, I'm just asking because I haven't been following. So they.
Oh yeah. So in 1.7.2, we accidentally broke drop buttons in some locations. And in Backdrop 1.8, we put in a fix that should have fixed them. I'm not sure if it went into 1.7.3. I think half of it went into 1.7.3 to fix the brokenness, but then we put in something, or maybe we haven't put it in yet. I don't know, but they're not broken right now in 1.7.3 or in 1.8. I think there is, under some circumstances, on the views UI on very small screens, the buttons will like overlap the heading of the view section. And we have 2 recommended fixes for that in a pull request. One of them is just making views instead of 3 columns, making it 2 columns would solve the problem. So changing the way that page responds. And then there was another one that involved refactoring the code a little bit so that rather than being position absolute, the drop button was floated right so that when it bonked into the thing, it would stack. So I don't think either of those solutions have been committed, but they're both possible workarounds. But yeah, it's less broken than it was in 1.7.2. All right. Well, if you guys don't have anything else, I think we should wrap this meeting and return to our regularly scheduled issue queue deep dive. And we can check in again next week. I think we should review with everyone again next week the plan for doing media for 1.9 and maybe a focus on translation, whether it is in core itself or getting translation server ready, so that people who need multilingual sites have an easier time with that. All right. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.